Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Russell Strickland, your host for An Unconventional Life podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Felicia Clark, a graduate of Pepperdine University. She's one of our unconventional students who took her graduate courses at night while working full-time in a demanding management position during the day. And she was able to keep up with her studies just fine until a death in her family made it very difficult for her to continue to focus. We're going to talk about what happened then. But of course, we called her Dr. Clark. We know it worked out well in the end. During graduate school, she mentioned that she was a plus size cover model with contracts with top modeling agency in the US. And now she combines her two passions of mathematics curriculum development and modeling to help women break up with body shame. And I think that's just fascinating. So we're going to get all into that. She has currently speaks to college students and other women's groups, counseling organizations, showing them to show data on the extreme beauty standards that control women's sexual energy while consuming wealth, health, and time. She has a TED Talk called BS in Beauty Standards. She's a best-selling author. Mentioned before that she's modeled for various places like Just My Size, Macy's, Jones, New York, several magazines and designer. And she's so excited right now. She mentioned it to me a couple of times before we went on the air. Her new book, Beauty and the Beastly Standards, is going to be releasing later this year. So we got a lot to talk about. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for joining us here today.
Thank you, Dr. Strickland, for having me. It's my pleasure, and I love the work you're doing. It really matters. You feel so alone when you're trying to do this in life and you're doing it by yourself, and other people may feel inconvenienced. So it's so easy to stop. So thank you for having this support system in place.
And the problem that we find is that students don't stop. They just aren't doing the things they need to be doing to keep going. And then quitting is kind of forced upon them. They just can't keep going because they haven't been doing what they need to do. So that's the thing. It's very insidious that you don't make an affirmative action to quit this thing. Usually you just aren't doing the things that you need to be doing and have that support and guidance there.
Yeah, you time out.
So, which is a good segue. I want to tell folks that today's episode is brought to you by Dissertation Done. That's my company. We help folks, adult doctoral students, through the dissertation process. So when you're working full time and trying to manage school, it's a lot. And if you need a little bit of support, guidance, and direction to get through that, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done, and we'll schedule a conversation. Just see if we might be a good fit to work with you. Our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program helps get students through the dissertation process in about 12 months or less, typically. And that saves you years off of what students are typically doing. And if, by the way, you've maybe graduated already and you're moving on and you're in that expert space as a coach or a consultant or a speaker, like our guest here today, Dr. Clark, the best way to establish yourself as an expert is not only to have the first name doctor, but also to have literally written the book on your area of expertise. And we can take you from a blank page to published author much faster than you would have imagined possible. Check us out at dissertationdone.com/book if you'd like to have a conversation about that. Anyway, Dr. Clark, again, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned that that you were going through school at Pepperdine while working in a management position during the day. That's a pretty successful career path already. What made you decide to go to graduate school, to go for a doctoral degree?
So I was in a program called Teach for America out of college. So I was a school teacher, and we work with educational justice as a social justice type of platform. At that time, I did. The organization is still there. I just, they've only asked you to put in 2 years. I put in 20, so I think I'm good.
Wow.
But I saw things like, and no disrespect, the districts I work in, I thank them for wanting to grow. So what I'm going to say is not a slam on them. They knew they had a problem and they were trying to fix it. And so I saw an opening. I have a total love for mathematics. I love it, love it, love it. And the person in charge of the first district I worked in couldn't even do the math to manage multi-million-dollar budgets.
Wow.
And the reason is because they have cutbacks and they just put somebody in charge of math, right? So I ended up being in charge of the math league competition, which they told me they didn't have the money to do. And I'm like, no one's touched this budget right here. I'll just use that budget. So they said, okay. They didn't even know they had that budget. So I was able to get the medals, the trophies, and pay teachers overtime to train the teams. Beautiful, beautiful district-wide project that parents really loved. And then from there, we did the family math program.
Too, to gain some confidence and to feel comfortable with this very, very important skill in this day and age. Yeah.
So bottom line, I just started doing stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I want to be in charge of the math program for real. Since I'm doing all this consulting work. So long story, I ended up being a consultant for the Department of Education in California. And I had to commute from Los Angeles and Compton Unified, which were my areas. I had to fly to Sacramento, fly back home. Very demanding job, but I loved it, right? And so I noticed the man that was in charge of the program had his doctorate. Most of the people who published the books, wrote the test manuals, and at that time were writing California standards. They had their doctorate. So I had just finished my master's, which Teach for America kind of pushed you and helped you get a master's if you wanted. Okay. You know, you had to do it yourself, but there's a lot of support and a lot of people in your cohort are getting their master's. So that ran smoothly, kind of. I had a couple glitches, but pretty smooth. So I'm like, okay, I'll just get my doctorate, right? Oh boy.
I was just thinking.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Similar to that. And the phrase that came to my mind at the time was famous last words, right? Hey, why don't I just do this? You know?
Yeah, why not?
So how did that go?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so with our first cohort, which had a couple of Teach for America people in that I didn't know them. They were from other cohorts. Okay. But sorry about that. We happened to be in the same class. And so we were called to a meeting and we were told there were 26 of us at the meeting. And I think 30 people were matriculating at the same time with us, and 26 were there. And the professor looked around the room and just did like this. And they said, well, only about 10 of you will graduate. And we were like, why'd you say that? I don't appreciate that. And I'm thinking I'm graduating and you're not talking to me, and so everyone was offended, right? And they're like, we're good students. And,
students, I'll tell them the numbers, depending on the program, they'll say it's about a 50-50 shot. I call it the dissertation coin flip. And it's not like somebody's actually flipping a coin behind your back or something, but those are the numbers. That's what you have to deal with. And I talk to students all the time. And they're like, well, not me. I don't quit. When I start something, I finish it. I'm like, okay, well, who are those 50% that are not finishing? It's tough. And everybody says, well, that's not me. That's the other guy. But you got to recognize this is a tough thing. If everybody feels that it's not me, I finish everything I start. You should really take those numbers to heart, that it's a lot tougher than you might have thought.
And it might not be you. It's not your intelligence. Life happens. And you have no idea. I mean, wow. So, but I feel like, I'm one of the ones I'm going to finish.
I believe it has less to do with intelligence
10 years
than it does with persistence. Yes, you have to be smart, but you really have to be willing to do the work and to figure out what the work is, humble enough to figure out what the work is, because in a lot of cases, schools don't really tell you what they want exactly. They just tell you, I don't want this, I don't want that. And to get to where you can figure out exactly what they want and graduate, it requires a lot of persistence.
And I think I agree with you, Dr. Strickland, like ultimately you have to do the work, but you have to grow. I mean, and you have to make hard life choices, very hard.
A lot of times. Yeah.
The first two people from my cohort dropped because their spouse was not supportive and they weren't having it. And I thought, wow, that's awful. And then my boyfriend, after my second year, because I was kind of blowing through my classes because I worked in my field. So grad school helped my job and I got promoted on the job. And then I could do a study on my job that I could do for school. So they worked
come
hand
back
in hand really well. Except I was working all the time. Long story short, won't bore you with the details, but basically my boyfriend just got another girlfriend. I was like, oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
And then he basically told me I have to drop out or we're over. And I'm like, you kind of moved on already. So why don't we just be over?
Yeah.
And I mean, he didn't say it in those words, but that basically is what would have had to happen. And I don't know, had he not had another girlfriend, maybe I would have considered dropping out. He was a great guy and that doesn't make him sound so great, but he was a great guy and he wanted children at that time and I didn't. And he's basically saying, this woman will have my child if you want. So that's pretty much what happened.
And to be fair to him, it's an all-consuming thing. I mean, relationships, in a sense, they have to take a little bit of a back seat to doing this. At least they're on an even footing with this doctoral degree pursuit for a little while, because this takes so much of your time and energy and focus. So it's not that he's a bad guy, that he didn't want to sit second to a piece of paper on the wall. It's just not that everybody will do that. And and that's one of the things we found with a lot of experience with our own students and a research project that one of our first students did, is that emotional support is one of those things that you need to be able to graduate. And if you don't have it at home in particular, it can be very, very tough to get through the program.
Mm-hmm. There was a Latina woman in our cohort that dropped, and because we went to school at night and then you had to have class all day Saturday. And then I don't remember if we had it back-to-back Saturdays or Saturday and Sunday, but bottom line, on the weekends, you had to come to school or you couldn't finish. And so the lady, brilliant lady, she basically said her husband was not gonna let her come on Saturday and she'll just take a lower grade. And so she did, but if you get a C in a class, that's like failing. You got to keep your grades up. So she dropped because of that.
Yeah. So a lot of tough decisions, life decisions that you have to make along the way. Best if the entire family is on board. We see that a lot with our students who are deciding, whether or not to get our help. That's a family decision as well. Mm-hmm. So very, very important piece. After the end of that relationship, how did you deal with that moving on towards graduating? Because that's a bit of a grieving process there.
Yeah, and that wasn't it though. So love math, but the statistics and how you wanted to, or how the education profession wanted them shared was hard for me, because to me, the numbers are clear, it's statistically significant. Can't you read those symbols? And in education, they don't want that. They want you to explain in words. And so I just struggle with that. So had a wonderful mentor. I won't say her name because she's still struggling in life. And I don't like to put people in my interviews if they didn't say I could. My mentor was a brilliant woman in statistics. I love statistics. I ended up getting the second highest grade in our whole department because I had a background in statistics. And then she helped me. She had a horrible car accident where someone died. And she carried that burden, like she just didn't function well. She just felt like I killed someone, I'm a bad person. And just my heart grieved for her, because it wasn't her fault. And of course, even if it was her fault, she didn't do it on purpose, but it wasn't even her fault. But she was so stuck there. And I get it. I mean, but it was so sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I lost that support.
That we deal with
And
through this process is that, life brings all sorts of challenges, and it doesn't stop when you're in a doctoral degree program. And so, you might think, I'm taking all I can take right now. I got these classes, I got this paper, I got to write research, I got to do. But life, with all of its ups and downs, is still going on at the same time. So it's very, very difficult to lose some of those things that have nothing to do with your study and what you're trying to accomplish in school, because of external forces in life. And I believe you said that you actually had a loss in your own family during this time too. Is that right?
Yeah. So one of the things, we all start kind of feeling stressed. So there were 5 of us that said, we'll just meet up together and study together. So that was beautiful. Yeah. And then one of the guys, unfortunately, he lost a child. So he left, and I mean, unbelievable. Another gentleman, he wore the collar. I think he was a priest, but he was from the Middle East. So he could have been a Muslim mosque. But someone attacked his place of worship and a hate crime. So then he couldn't finish. Yeah, it was unbelievable, right? And then I still pressed for it. I still finished, and I was ready to go into comps. We had spring break over Easter, and still hard for me. Got everything organized, and I got the call my father passed. And it was like all my thoughts just went out, And I couldn't write. I couldn't defend my work. I knew it in my head. I was sharp, and then when you do a practice with someone, I couldn't even remember my own research, and I just said, I need to go on leave, right? So I did that from work and from school, and then went back to work, and that went well for me. I was the supervisor of, I think, maybe 60 people, and they all band together. They were wonderful. They I'm a very rigid, anal personality kind of. We have annual plans, and we meet those plans, and we're number one, right? And so I had a great team. So they were able to still, I'm so sorry, I thought I turned it off already. My team was able to follow the plans I left. It was beautiful. And we were able to still meet marks and still be the number one team, even though I took a little bit of leave. So I got a promotion. And
all this going on.
Right. And then I got invited to speak at national conferences. That was my first book project I was invited to do. So all this is happening while I'm on leave from school. So career on fire. Yeah. Then won't talk a whole lot about that, but I had a wonderful opportunity for my modeling career. Now, this whole time I was modeling, but you get paid to sit out, which I don't know if a lot of people know that. So I had the same agent as Anna Nicole Smith. And so she just was on fire. And so people would sometimes, and not that this ever happened, but sometimes say, oh, she's a Black Anna Nicole Smith. Because I did like swimsuit, lingerie modeling, people like them. And when I say it's based on your sell-through rate. And so as a math person, I could read the data and I'm like, I'm doing really well. But they just didn't want that at the time. They didn't want plus size women to upstage thin women. So I got a promotion where I'm paid more and work less. So I was at the top agency in the country and worked with big name labels and no small name labels anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
So and I tell students often, or at least ask them, I tell them that, listen, 99% of the population doesn't have a doctoral degree. This is tough. It's okay if you decide to walk away. And most of the students, when I tell them that, are like, oh no, I'm committed to this. I'm going to do it.
Walking away.
Done, right? So that's what I typically hear back from them. But I have that discussion with them in all seriousness, that you need to understand that's an option. And it's not like you're some big loser if you take that option, because it just makes you like 99% of the population. So it's not a problem. Here you are, career's doing well, second career's doing well. The issues you're having, the loss in your family, what made you decide now I'm going to go back to school? What pulled you back, and what got you back to doing that?
This is another thing that chokes me up, because I didn't make that decision. I guess ultimately I was told I better make that decision.
Okay.
But my career I got everything I wanted pretty much, except I wasn't a college professor, but that's okay. I worked with colleges in my position with Los Angeles School District and with Compton Unified. So I even had classes either that I taught or my staff taught where you get college credits. So that felt college professory enough. I felt like, okay, I'll take it. I don't need to actually finish, right? And so I was coming up timing out. You have 10 years, right?
Sure.
And so I was like, oh, well, that I just won't finish. Well, there was a weekend, a group that met on the weekends called APAS, the Association for Pan-African Doctoral Scholars. And so I was involved in that. You can be a grad student or already graduated. And it's a networking group, and they encourage you to publish. And I had published and done all that. And so I was helping other people. And I have a friend, and I didn't ask her if I could say her name, but I think it'll be okay. She's my fairy godmother in human form. And her name is Jackie. So Jackie started after me.
Okay.
And Jackie was a leader. Jackie got the Black alumni at Pepperdine together. And so she knew I was about to time out. And she's like, Felicia, you are going to finish. And I was like, well, no, I didn't have my notes organized anymore. And then some research stale dates. So you got to do it over. And get the latest books. And I was like, I don't really need that. And she's like, yes, you do. So Jackie decided I was going to finish. And you cannot tell Jackie no. Her name, Dr. Scott. You don't tell her no, right? So I was like, so I told her, okay, I'll do it. But I really wasn't going to. I was just like, I don't want to have any beef with Dr. Scott. So tell her what she wants to hear.
Jackie, and then go do my thing.
Right. And so she said, how is coming along? I'm like, oh, it's okay. She's like, I'm going to meet you at the library next Monday. And I was like, eek, I don't have anything. So she's like, I'm going in and you better be there. So she just set up a library schedule where we're meeting. And the only reason I went is because she was there. And one day, maybe our second or third meeting, I'm thinking, how can I worm out of this? Because I hadn't even read my research for a few years. And I just was trying to find the words, and we were at a round table in the library. And I was like, I don't want to finish. I just, my career is going fine. And I would just looked up to tell her that, I don't want to finish. And she was asleep. She was so exhausted. She was so tired. She had a demanding job. Her daughter was having a wonderful career in the WNBA, and she was very supportive and very protective of her daughter to make sure nothing bad happened. And she was doing both of those and being, they have athletes' moms. So she was very active in that and would teach the other mothers how to manage their child's money so that it lasts, and how to invest. So she was doing all of that, and then coming to the library to make sure I finished. So she sleep. That's how tired she was, just to help me and make sure I finished. And when I just stared at her while she was asleep, I was like, I'm going to finish, And I had a file for an extension. It was very difficult to finish. And so I had to get strategic about finishing, and I did.
Felicia,
so if you want to finish fast, not because you have to under a deadline, but it just makes sense to finish fast. I'll figure that out.
Yeah, no, I do talk to my students about that all the time. But I tell everybody, you're an adult, you make decisions, you decide what you want to do and what's important to you. Most of the students I work with, they want to graduate quickly. And that puts you on a certain path towards graduation. It means you make certain choices and certain decisions. And then folks who have other goals, that's fine. That's just not who I work with, because that's not the way we do things. We Our goal is to get you to graduation as soon as possible. But I got to say, Felicia, that story of
Yeah.
recognizing that someone was there and supporting you, and I mean, that's just really something. And
Hmm.
you've got to wonder now, who is seeing you while you're not seeing them, and saying, I got to do what she did as well. Because that's what happens in this world. And that's really something. Yeah. I really appreciate that story.
Yeah.
Man, wow. So let's so you went back to school. Obviously there's a lot of hard work to do because, like you said, a lot of your research is out of date. You had to get the ball rolling again. Once you recommitted to it, was there anything else that really made you wonder if you were going to finish, or made you think I need to walk away from this? Or was that recommitment?
No, once I decided I'm finishing, all I could figure out is like, how do I get this done quickly, efficiently, and effectively?
Good.
And by this time, I had so many friends that graduated that started after me,
You have some.
because I was at the level of chapter 1, 2, 3, and I never defended it. And then they say, wait, and then do 4, 5, 6. But so many friends had graduated, and they said, look at the whole thing first and set up your chapter 3 so you can blow through chapter 4 quickly. So that was so helpful.
I love that. That is what we do with our students, because I tell them that so my kids went to a magnet school that used Dr. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was the work that they used. And habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. And I tell them, when you're talking about your doctoral degree, the end that I want to talk about is you getting your data collected and analyzed, because it's not obvious, but that's when the real work is done. When you've collected and analyzed your data, what you've done is you've already gone chapter 1, 2, 3, like you said. The proposal's done. The committee's approved it. Psychologically, they go from wondering, I don't know about this Felicia. I don't know if she's going to make it. I don't know what she's going to do. They've gone from there to, no, we're on team Felicia. Like, we already said yes to her. So when it comes time to look at your final dissertation, they're predisposed to say yes to you again. So you've won that particular. That's not something you can control, what your committee says, but you've already pulled them over on your side. So you got that external piece gone. Then you have to collect your data, right? Well, that's again something that you can't fully control because it's an external thing. But once you've done it, then you've got that piece done. That's another risk factor gone. And the last thing that you have to do conceptually is understand what that data is telling you, and how to report that, how to speak to people about it. Once you understand it, even before you write it down, that's the last hurdle out of your way. Now the rest of it's just work. It's not, can I do it? Can I not do it? Am I going to figure it out? Is somebody not going to like me and not do what they said they were going to do to help me? None of that stuff matters anymore. Now it's just sitting down, writing it out, giving it to your committee, and then your committee is going to push back a little bit, but not like they push back for chapter 1, 2, 3. They've already said they want to say yes to you again. You have to give them an excuse to say yes now, rather than them having reasons to say no. So that's that notion of starting with chapter 3. Like I said, we talk to our students about that all the time. It's so important to know where you're going, and to be very comfortable with the fact that you can get there. And that's a big motivator too. Once you know exactly what you got to do to graduate, it's a lot easier, rather than looking at this whole big kind of elephant and figuring out, how am I going to do this thing?
Yeah, because for me, I had this notion in my head of what I wanted to do, and it was big, big, big.
Yeah.
But when I had to graduate and get done, I got very strategic about just carving out a little small section of that, and I was able to build a career on it. Specifically, because I was the mathematics coordinator in a big district, I was very disturbed by how special ed was made up of Black and brown children, and then they teach them basically 2 + 2 over and over again, and they should have been learning algebra. And they would say, oh, these kids can't understand algebra. Well, some of the guys in the classes play football. I'm like, the football field is a Cartesian coordinate grid. They can add and subtract integers in their head. Why are they not passing algebra? That's ridiculous to me. And I had I went to a college with a very good football team. And so we would go, and I didn't really know the game. I just would watch it because it was fun. So all I saw was a mathematics grid. It's a graph. It's like quadrant 1 of a graph. That's what football looked like to me, and then, quadrant running 2. And I didn't understand it any other way. So then it was hard for me to understand why aren't football players doing well in algebra. So I know that they could. So I'm trying to prove this, and I have to validate an instrument. So that all that got off the plate when I had to graduate. So I was going to school. Yeah. Yeah. So long story short, I was going to school in California, but I'm from Colorado. And a professor at Colorado State University wrote something called the Math Anxiety Rating Scale. And so I bought some copies from him, and I was like, I'm building my study around that. And then I had worked in Linwood Unified, and just I was like, I got to use my resources. So my first principal had moved up to associate superintendent over the years. Okay. So I called him, and we got along very well when I was a teacher working under him. So of course he remembered me and said I could do a study in his district. So that wasn't even my home district, but I just needed different districts to make it valid, so you don't have a Hawthorne effect and those kind of things. So I wanted to do my research in 3 districts. And so Dr. Garcia let me do that. And then Dr. George McKenna, icon in education, had the good fortune of working with him in 2 different districts. So he let me do a study. And so I was able to get in districts quickly because I knew the people, but I picked something where I knew the people, where I could, I didn't just have to send a cold letter that sits there for 4 months. Like, I just went in person and asked them, can I do this? And so like within a week or 2, they would let me in and give the math anxiety rating scale.
And I think that's brilliant. That's exactly what we tell our students, in terms of thinking about chapter 3, is where can you get data? What kind of data do you have access to? What is it that you could do? And once we start figuring out what kind of things they can do and they feel comfortable being able to do, then we figure out, okay, how do we put that into a study? What instruments are we going to use? What are we going to do with those resources that you have in order to turn that into a study? But I think that's very, very smart that you said, I know I have access to these people. I have a network. I'm going to make sure my study is something that draws from that network so that I can actually use that those connections. Brilliant.
Yeah. And then the blessing in disguise for me, instead of proving what I think I know, I really just had to look at the results that came back. And it was so profound. And I'm so glad that happened, which is what you're supposed to be learning anyway, right? To do the study and not have researcher bias. But in my original model, there was a lot of researcher bias. And so I didn't have that with the math anxiety rating scale. So we just looked at the results, and it was crystal clear that these students were failing algebra because how they're tested, not because what they know. And so I built my career from that, and published books. I've worked on math textbooks, revamping them so that special ed children get a fair shot at passing. The high school exit exam, I wrote a study guide for that, and special ed students, and not just special ed, because a lot of students just struggle in math. So anybody, but my theory, and that's what Dr. George McKenna helped me think through, that if you can serve the most struggling population, you have tools to help all the others. So that's why I focus on special ed, because like they're the center of the Venn diagram, kind of, and so I'm able to help close the achievement gap between girls and boys and help all kinds of things. But I focused on really understanding what was going on in special ed with these brilliant kids that know stuff in their head, but it doesn't translate on the paper. And so that's what I built a career on. But I didn't build my career while I was in grad school. I just got graduated.
That's another very important point. People don't come to doctoral students for help. They come to doctors when they're looking for an expert. So finish the doctoral student part of your life as quickly as you can so that you can go on and do those other things that you mentioned. But I want to go back because you mentioned earlier that, you know, you had this career in math that was going quite well, but also you said your career in modeling was going pretty well. And I know that you have done some interesting things related to that since, like the book that you have.
Yeah.
Right? So tell us a little bit more about this other thing that's important in your life and what you've been able to do since you graduated with regard to that.
Yeah. So I mentioned I write math books and math tests. And so they're standards, right? So I've done a lot of studying with the anatomy of good standards. I've studied the field of psychometrics, measuring thinking. And so there's good standards and bad standards. And so over the years in modeling, you have to meet modeling standards, right?
Sure.
And so over time, the beauty standards just make no sense. It was like, you learn classic beauty and people say, well, modeling and math, that's so weird. But actually, I was good at print modeling, not necessarily all the other kinds, but I was good at print modeling because to me, it was just mathematical proportions. There's classic beauty and it's math to me. Yeah. So I could do that very well. Some of the other stuff, I learned it, but it was a struggle. But the posing, that was my preference. Yeah. And so then over the years, they would say like, oh, you need a breast job, but you can make your breast look bigger and smaller with tape, with clothing tricks. You don't need to go under the knife. Why are they having all these women go under the knife? And historically, breasts were considered sacred. Why are you asking us to? That's different. And you Photoshop everything else. Why don't you Photoshop the ideal boob size? And it's not that we want to be Photoshopped. They don't let your pictures out. We don't own our pictures. They pay us, and the person who paid us owns the pictures. They would Photoshop them. So just Photoshop the kind of boobs you want. Why do we need to have surgery? So I was just like, this is crazy. So there was a book that came out, I don't remember, maybe I want to say 90-ish or something, but I had never read it, but it was very intriguing. And it was called The Beauty Myth. So I finally sat down and read it, and she nailed it. The author is Naomi Wolf. And she put voice to everything that I was seeing that just didn't make sense about how beauty standards are about control. And when the economy crashed in 2008, for a very short time, there were more women in the workplace than men. I don't know if people know that, but like places closed, there was the foreclosure crisis, people laid off very fast. And so high-end jobs, which were mostly men, the high-paying jobs, those cut first. So women had the lower paying jobs, but they were still part of the workforce deriving income. So 2008, when there was more women in the workforce for just about a year and a half, that's when you need Botox, you need butt fillers, you need, you need 50 kind of surgeries to be beautiful. So that was so clear to me because I read data. I'd rather read a data report than watch something cool on TV, So I'm looking at all these data reports, and I was like, it was painfully obvious to me that they're using these beauty standards to take women's money, because women were making the money, to consume your time, because then you don't have time to really be powerful, and you're just living on exhaustion. Even if you got power, you can't enjoy it because you're exhausted. So I'm seeing all this, I had the data that women spend 3.5 hours more per week grooming to look acceptable for their workplace. So to me, from my modeling background, if you're deriving benefit from women looking beautiful, then they should get a model fee. That's how I feel about it. Not that it really would happen, but the economics made sense that, like restaurants, they want the hostess to be beautiful. Well, she should get a model fee, and you should pay for the makeup. You can call it a makeup artist. Why is she paying for her own makeup and spending her own time off the clock to get model ready? Like, they pay you to do that when you're a model. So I'm just looking at all these economics and thinking something doesn't pass the smell test here. And so Naomi Wolf's book just basically said, as women get more power and money, beauty standards get higher and higher, and she calls it an Iron Maiden. I call it beastly standards. So beauty and the beastly standards. Beauty becomes more beastly if women have power. I've interviewed women all around the world because it's the same formula, but different actual beauty standards. So it depends. If you live in this country, your eyes are what make you beautiful. In this country, it's your hip structure. In this country, it's your lip size, but it's the same formula. They just have movable pieces. So I interviewed women that live in areas with low birth rates, where the society needs women to have more children. The beauty standard looks like them. In societies where they want you to control women, the beauty standard is the opposite of how you naturally look. Consistent all over the world.
Wow. And when's the book coming out?
So I have a prototype already written. We're going to launch, I'm launching a vlog called Goddess Conversations coming in at the end of September. And the app is called Girl. It's an app for Black women. Okay. And I love the tagline. It's an app for Black women built by Black men who love their mamas. So even though it's a woman's outreach, it's certainly very man friendly, and we appreciate the men who are helping us, take this step. So that will launch at the end of September, and I'm going to build up my audience to a number that I know in my head that I don't want to say, and then I'll launch my book. But the book's already ready.
Awesome.
Well, being tweaked.
Yeah, well, it's always right. You got to put a deadline out there, and that's when the book's ready, right?
Right. So yeah. So thank you, Dr. Strickland. And again, bless you for being there, because I wouldn't have finished without someone to really hold my hand and walk me down the doctoral aisle, right? And so that's what you're doing, and it's so needed. And if anyone's out there on the fence, or you're at home paying tuition every semester, because I did, and not moving forward, just reach out and get help. I mean, we kind of are, we've been so rewarded for working alone when we get to this step. And then you have to work alone on some level because everyone's research is different. But what you don't have to do is be alone. That's right. You need a support structure.
Yeah. So one of the things I've noticed is a lot of doctoral students have this hero complex, and that being strong means like Atlas with the world on your shoulders. And I think being strong is being able to say, hey, listen, I don't know how to do this yet. Let me reach out for some help, because that's who's really strong, right? Somebody who's not worried about somebody, how they're going to be perceived or what somebody's going to say about them, but just they're going to say, hey, I don't know how to do this yet. And yet I think it's an important word. It gives you hope and optimism, as opposed to, I don't know how to do this and you're hanging your head down. But recognize that that's what a student is. It's a person who doesn't know how to do this yet. So don't worry about that. That's not a sign of weakness. It's the fact that you are growing, and you talked about that growth earlier. That's so important. So yeah, thank you for saying that. And to everyone who, if you're going through this process, do find your help somewhere. Dr. Clark found hers, I found mine going through this process. And then of course we offer it to students, but wherever you have to look, find your help somewhere, because it's very, very difficult to do it alone, almost impossible. You need help.
And can I make one more comment? Because I made some notes and I didn't say this. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Very, very key to me graduating quickly was my chair was never my professor. She had a vested interest in me graduating. So my chair wrote books on anxiety. And then my area is math anxiety. So by me graduating and us working together, it opened up a field for her in math anxiety.
Yeah. And that's something that it's not always going to work that way, but you do want to try, if you can, to find committee members that, if they don't have a vested interest in you graduating, at least they understand and they can appreciate that that's your goal, is that you want to graduate as soon as possible. Because some chairs don't share that goal. They think it's supposed to take a long time. Mine took 6 years, yours is going to take 6 years. No, that's not fair. That's not true. If your goal is to graduate quickly, make sure that your professors, the committee that you're working with, they understand that goal and they agree with it. Not to say that it's their goal as well, but they can appreciate that it's your goal and they're not going to stand in your way. That's what you need. So anyway, again, Dr. Clark, I want to thank you for being here because, so much wonderful insight on this journey and how it works, and then the rewards that come after. I appreciate all of that. Tell folks if they wanted to reach out to you, about, math anxiety or about, these beauty standards or anything that we've talked about, and they just want to continue the conversation. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So my website is drfeliciaclark.com, and I have a contact form there on my website. That website is all about my body image coaching platform. As far as mathematics, I don't have a website for that. I just meet people. I've done it for years, and they just call you and put you on a team. But I do educational audits. I read the budgets for organizations. If people need to downsize, I look at their spending habits versus their goals and recommend cuts as far away from the core of their core values so that they kind of don't feel it. As best as I can do that. So that's been popular since COVID. And then I write standardized math tests and so
Awesome.
and textbook auditor.
.com. And if you can't take notes right now, just go to our website at dissertationdone.com/blog, and you can find Dr. Clark's episode there. We'll list all of our contact information and our TED Talk, and see what we can do to link to the book as soon as we can. We'll do all that stuff so you can find
Thank you.
How to reach out to Dr. Clark that way.
Well, thank you, Dr. Strickland. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you once again, and I want to let everyone else know that I want that today's episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done. So we've talked about this dissertation process. If you're facing it, in the middle of it, whatever, you need help, guidance, and support. If you want to talk to us about how to get it, dissertationdone.com/done is where you go. If you've gotten through that stage of your life and you want to be a published expert, like Dr. Clark is so excited about her book, find out about how we can get you from the blank page to being a published author as soon as possible. And we can have a conversation. To reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book. So that's how you can reach us. Dr. Clark is at drfeliciaclark.com. And again, thank you so much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
And to everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful day and go out and live your unconventional life. Bye for now.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.